All right, hey Sarah.
Hey D, what's up?
I'm doing real great. We're in the car driving back from Austin. And no, that's not true. We're driving to Austin from
Dallas.
Dallas. Okay, yeah. So we're talking about explicit instruction. The scholars have just described their own view of what explicit instruction is.
Yep.
So I was really curious to hear your perspective on what explicit instruction is. So tell us what you're thinking.
That's a really good question, Devin.
Okay. Well, that's good, Sarah. Because we're doing a whole module on this topic, so I'm glad that it's good.
Glad you asked that question.
Yeah. So talk about it.
Man, explicit instruction is being very explicit, but that's like an impossible word to use for explicit instruction. What is it?
And doing instruction.
And doing instruction.
Okay.
Yeah, surprisingly, these things go together.
Okay. Yeah, gotcha.
Explicit instruction is just being very meaningful with the instruction that you're providing to students. So when I think about it in mathematics, when I see a teacher doing explicit instruction, the teacher is doing modeling of different concepts or procedures, and really importantly, giving them a lot of different practice opportunities. So it's not just all the teacher, and it's not just all the students just doing stuff on their own, but that practice opportunity must be like guided between the teacher and the student, and then also the student practicing on their own, because the teacher's not always going to be there. What do you think about that?
No, I think that's exactly right. I feel the same thing about it in reading. And I bet you'll agree too in math that like the amount of practice versus the amount of modeling that you do varies depending on the type of skill and the level of students.
Because sometimes if you're like introducing something, there's going to be like a lot more modeling.
Yep.
But if it's something that the students have learned before, then the practice is going to increase.
Right.
Yeah.
One thing I've noticed sometimes too is that even with a good intention of modeling and an attempt to do good practice, it doesn't go well. And
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think that the biggest issue is that what I call supporting practices, like the techniques the teachers use within that context aren't good. So for example, like if you do a model where you're doing all the talking,
oh, that's terrible.
It's terrible, right? So like, I mean, that's the idea, you're modeling. So like, when you think about supporting practices, like what are some things that teachers can do that result in better learning through that model and practice piece?
Well, one of the things that, and I heard this at a conference, and I wish I could remember who said this or where I picked it up, but somebody was always talking about the frequent responses within explicit instruction, and that students should always respond in some way about every 30 to 60 seconds. So if a teacher's just sitting up there and just talking for 5 minutes straight, you basically have probably lost 95% of the students in the class.
Yep.
But if you're asking students to write this on your paper, asking them the questions like, how do you know if we're going to regroup? What does it mean if something's a numerator? That type of thing. If it's a turn and talk, if it's a do this problem on your page. I mean, you could be doing anything, but students just have to be frequently responding. And that's, I think, one of the core misconceptions, which I think you were trying to get at,
right.
And I think actually were, about modeling is so many teachers, when they think that's like the quote I do,
right.
that they're just doing stuff. But that is not true. The teacher needs to engage the students constantly and giving them opportunities for response, and then also really thinking about the feedback component. And in mathematics, we're always thinking about, corrective feedback, so when students answer incorrectly, but also like feedback that is good. And,
right,
yeah,
sure. And I'll add to that, immediate, right? Like, I mean, I think...
Yes, that is very key.
One thing that, when I think about basic reading lessons that bother me, is a lot of times people with... like beginning reading, they'll let kids puzzle over a word. The kid doesn't get it, they'll give them 20, 25 seconds to be like, what do you think it is? Like, can you use context, look at the picture, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And it bothers me because it's so inefficient. It actually limits the amount of practice opportunities
that you could do in a lesson, right?
Right, because basically the kid is spending 25 seconds being unsuccessful and often feeling frustrated when we could have very quickly given that corrective feedback.
And many times they probably already checked out of the lesson, right?
Right, absolutely, yeah. Especially if we're going to continue to do that. So, I mean, that resonated with you. I mean, do you feel like you see the same thing in math?
I totally agree with you. So in mathematics, a lot of lessons open up with like this do now, which sometimes is related to content that the students have learned before, but a lot of times it's kind of like trying to press them into the next concept. And if you're a student who is struggling and you are having a hard time understanding the core concepts of multiplication, you're not going to be able to do that do now. And so those students have checked out of the lesson probably like for the entire length of the lesson.
And it just got started.
Yeah, exactly. And you said something else there when you just said something that was like very key.
Well,
all.
I mean, all right.
Yeah.
Clearly, all of it's very important. So,
I
can't.
Very important explicit instruction things. I think the thing when you say that, like, when we are letting students just kind of like tread water.
Yeah.
Like, all of the students that we're really concerned about have already shown that they are struggling with reading, math, writing, those types of things.
Yep.
And so time is of the essence. And we need to provide not just the most explicit instruction, but I also think the most efficient instruction that we can possibly provide. And doing an activity where you're like, oh, just figure out what this word means, that's not efficient by any means.
No, it's not efficient at all. And, you know, and it's often not purposeful. I mean, I feel sometimes... Like,
that is another nice keyword to use in terms of explicit instruction.
Right, I mean, I think when,
I said meaningful, you said purposeful.
And I think that, like, when I think about the modeling component, I think about the way in which we model and what we model, I think purposeful is really important, because I think, like, I find a lot of times, I bet you can identify with this in terms of, like, beginning math skills, is, like, the objective really is for kids to know how to use a principle, like the vowel consonant E rule, right? A and letter E makes the long sound A, like in make, right? It's very cool. It's very, you should all learn the magic. You should learn that rule. But there are two ways you can explain it. One, you can just say, when you see an A, another letter in E, that says A, right? That's one way you could do it. The other way you could do it is you'd be like, well, you have the E at the end of the word, and when there's an E at the end of the word, it, like, looks at the A, and it's magic, and, like, it makes the A say its name, okay? And I'm not, like, that sounds like I'm joking, but that's what people do. And the thing about that is that it's really inefficient, and it requires kids to use language that's not necessary for the skill that you're teaching. Like, I'm trying to get kids to read words.
It's also wasting, like, all of this space in their brain in terms of processing their working memory and that type of thing.
Absolutely, right. So the goal is very simple, but the way that we're teaching it is more complex if we do it that way. So that's why I say it's not purposeful, right? It's not being clear enough about, like, my objective is to do this, and so I want to do it in a really clear way. And I think that one of the things that happens a lot of times in particularly general ed instruction is that there's this overlying principle that you must be having kids talk all the time.
Oh, Jesus in math, we see that. I shouldn't say Jesus, I'm sorry.
Okay,
in mathematics, we see that all the time. With, like, engaging students in discourse. Right. And so that's where the turn and talk, turn and talk to your partner. Well, you know what? You can't turn and talk if you don't know, A, what you're going to talk about, and, you know, B, how to talk about that. So, were there any other elements of explicit instruction that you were kind of thinking about in terms of this car discussion?
I think that, you know, we kind of hit on this in a general way, but I think brisk pacing is critical. I mean, I think
that's the attention thing going on right there.
One of the activity scholars you'll be doing, the final activity, is going to be to write your own sort of script. And one thing that we'll come back to is this idea that, like, when we write scripts in order to get students to learn something in an explicit way, we spend a lot of time writing and rewriting so that it is maximally efficient. It is brisk, right? Because, like, if you write something that's even, like, 2 seconds too long, you're going to say, like, 800 times across the course of, like, you know, like 30 lessons or something, right? And, like, if it's 2 seconds, I mean, that adds up to real time, and it gets annoying for the kids and for you. So I think that, like, having that, like, attention to detail when you're writing a script, where it's just like, how am I going to say this in the most efficient way? How am I going to make sure I have, you know, I'm moving quickly to the next thing? I think it's really key.
Also important.
Yeah,
I totally agree.
What about you? Is there anything we haven't covered?
I think the practice component, I always want people to be more reflective on that, because I feel like a lot of teachers put their stock into the modeling, whereas the practice is really when a lot of the authentic learning occurs. So really focusing on that.
I think that's really a good point. And I think, you know, some of you who work in the academic world, I think you may know the I do, we do, you do sequence. And we've not mentioned that so far, and that's intentional, because I think what we find is that the we do and you do kind of become this sort of muddled thing. And, you know, what we really want to emphasize is it's practice. And there are different ways to do practice, and the amount of practice you do where the kids are doing it on their own or with you might vary, but it's all practice, and it'll all result in better student learning. So we're not using that framework. I want to talk for a second about...
do we have to wrap this up?
We do have to wrap it up. How long are we going here?
9 minutes.
That's good. You guys, we're interesting, so it's fine.
Under 10.
Under 10. All right. I want to talk to our behavior folks, our low incidence folks, about how this relates to them, because, you know, it might feel like this is all academic, and we still have an emphasis on that, even for those of you who focus on behavior. We want you to think about it in relation to academics. But you know, even when you're teaching things like social skills and so on, like I think about like teaching a social story, for example, like when you're doing that requires explicit instruction. I think it's easy to kind of not think about it that way. So just, I mean, you sort of, what is your perspective on the point I'd make that it's important to understand this because, say again?
It's all around us. You can't let it go.
It's all, well, why don't we close on that?
I feel like I'm going to sing a song about explicit instruction being all around us, but let's
so
save that for another day.
For a bonus activity for this module, if you'd like to write a song, guitar optional, and share with us, like, well, we'll make you famous. So, all right.
All right.
Should we leave it there?
I think D, that was good.
All right, that's
yeah.
good. All right. Thanks, scholars.
Bye.
Well, good preview for the next thing you're going to do. You're going to watch a video of me describing the model of explicit instruction that we're using for the National Center on Intensive Intervention. We hope you'll find kind of helpful in thinking about this. After you'll do that, you're going to read an article that sort of lays out principles of explicit instruction that may not precisely match the model I'm going to describe to you in the next video. We want you to reflect on those differences. So those are the upcoming activities. You already know the rest of the module, so we look forward to seeing you
awesome.
down the trail.
Bye.